All right, hi. Today we're going to talk about persuasion, and those chapters dealing with persuasion are chapters 24 and 25 in your textbook. Because I am kind of a one-man show today, I have to kind of launch the camera and then come back in front to set up a few things to get us going. This PowerPoint that we are looking at is located in this packet that you were given related to debate. And so it's located in the back of the packet, right after the guide sheet on the constructive speech and the sample outlines. So if you could go there, everything that I show you up on the screen is going to be right in that PowerPoint. The speech to persuade is also called the speech to believe. And it's necessary for us to engage in persuasion because it's the only way that truth will prevail. I love this quote by John Haslings that said that the only way that truth will prevail is if it is advocated for. The days of the old Western where the man in the white hat riding on the white horse would always defeat the man in the black hat on the black horse are over. In our society, people have learned to represent what they think is truth, whether that truth is correct or not. And if you want your truth to prevail, you're going to have to do that same thing. So that's why we persuade. Now, we encounter persuasion in our everyday lives, and it's important for that reason. We're going to learn about it to understand how to view good persuasion from bad. Good persuasion has a certain look to it. It always promotes choice, and it always follows valid reasoning. If ever a speaker is talking to you and trying to persuade you, but you feel as if you're pressured and not allowed to still choose differently, or you can't follow the logic that they're giving you, then you're probably not in the midst of good persuasion. Good persuasion also is the honest expression of what the speaker believes to be true. They're not pursuing some other type of personal gain in persuading you, like monetary gain or the gain of power, which is actually the most intoxicating pursuit in our society. It's an argument that can be judged on its own merit, and when you're done receiving that persuasion, you feel as if you've been broadened, not assaulted. That's when the persuasion is good. When the persuasion is bad, usually some of these things are happening. People are coerced or forced into compliance because of a threat, or they're manipulated or made to feel guilty or shameful if they're unwilling to change and move towards what the speaker wants. They're oftentimes the victims of demagogue, where irrelevant issues are put at the forefront and the more significant issues are then not addressed. And this barrage of irrelevancy is what is used to win the argument. And when the other more valid arguments are brought to bear, they're not recognized. They're simply disregarded. Then bribery, gifts are offered that are undeserved as part of an effort to gain compliance. And the last one is the persuader just simply lies. Now, you may find yourself tempted to engage in this type of persuasion, or you may have been victimized by this type of persuasion. Why don't you want to buy into this? Because all these forms of persuasion only create temporary allegiance. As soon as the gifts are gone, those who've been bribed are no longer with you. As soon as people realize that they are being manipulated or demagogued, then they are not with you. As soon as the threat is removed, they're no longer with you. So if you want good, sound persuasion that fits with the attributes I just mentioned, because you want your persuasion to last. Okay? Now, in persuasion, a speaker is likely to encounter resistance. Resistance is not uncommon because change is not comfortable. So people will minimize you as the source of the change. They'll say, why should we believe you? Or they will minimize the charge. Well, it's not that serious of an issue. Why is it that you feel we must even address this? Sometimes they become antagonistic and will even threaten you, just because they feel threatened themselves. Or they'll deny that it even exists. This denial often comes into play when religious leaders are caught in some form of, immorality. Those that follow them are so dismayed, a lot of times they will just deny the charge, even though the evidence is crystal clear. And other forms of resistance, the buyer, the person that receives it, buys into it, but they're not happy that you brought it to their attention. As a counselor, sometimes I get this when I bring to bear some considerations of maybe a significant other not following a certain moral mode of conduct, or some other esteemed individual. That people they understand that what I'm saying is true, but they're not happy that the truth was brought to them, and they need some time to take it in. Because there's resistance and because there's negative persuasion, it's important to learn how to manage your arguments effectively so that you can navigate around both of those pitfalls that would stall persuasion. Now, how do you do this? Well, the first thing we have to do is make sure we have a sound understanding of what an argument is. So what is your argument? Basically, it's a stated position. It's a stance that you've taken on an issue and that you plan to support. Okay? Every issue has a claim, some evidence, and a warrant involved with it if it's well structured. Now, what are some claims that you can make? Well, we'll get back to that. The claims, the evidence, and the warrants in a minute. Any argument or stated position that you take has to have at least two sides to it. That's worthy of arguing. So if you're going to argue that all human beings need to breathe oxygen, you're not going to find many people arguing or rallying behind you to argue that or to debate that. Why? Because it's a one-sided argument. It only has one side. Instead, any claim that you make, any argument that you take on, rather, needs to have at least two sides that's worthy of discussion. If your argument supports the way things are, it's in support of status quo. Status quo represents the way things are. If your argument supports change, then it's against status quo. In debate, people that are against status quo are on the affirmative side, and people that are for status quo or not in favor of the change, they are on the negative side. Once you have a clear understanding of this, then you're ready to start to structure your argument. Well, you're almost ready. Another thing you must do is get a feel for where those who you're going to persuade, those who are going to be in your audience and hear your argument, where they stand. Audiences or receivers of persuasion usually fall into one of three categories. Either they think considerably differently than you do, and if they do, then you have to structure your argument differently. If they're with you but they're just apathetic, again, you have to structure your argument differently. You're not trying to persuade them intellectually to agree with you because they already do. You're trying to persuade them to then take action. Sometimes they are with you. They're with you intellectually. They're with you in act, but they need reinforcement. Well, these folks you prepare for quite differently than the other two groups. In either case, in order to achieve a change in attitudes, beliefs, or values, you have to know where they stand initially. All right, so after you determined where your audience members, well, the majority of them, stand concerning your argument, and you've determined which side of the argument you're on, then it's time to start to prepare your argument. Aristotle renders three key factors to consider, or strategies to consider as the speaker structures their argument. And those are known as the classical appeals. Then there are scholars who took the thoughts of Aristotle and developed them further to create the contemporary appeals. We're going to spend quite a bit of time on the classical appeals. We're going to review the contemporary appeals some as well at the end, but they are spelled out quite nicely in your textbook, and I do recommend that you go there. All right, so let's start to look at these three classical appeals. There are three: logos, which is logical or rational appeals; pathos, which is an emotional appeal; and ethos, which deals with speaker credibility. I memorized these a little easier based on a wordplay. So logos means logic, pathos means passion, and ethos means ethics. Maybe that'll help you. That being said, we're going to look at those first, and then we'll come back to the contemporary appeals that are below. The first one we'll look at is logos or logical argumentation. This is where the speaker persuades their audience by using reasoning and facts. There are two forms of these appeals. The first one is known as a syllogism, and the second one an enthymeme. A syllogism is basically a three-part argument that involves a major premise or a major claim or major state of existence, a minor premise or a minor state of existence, and then from those two states, a conclusion is drawn and is deducted or drawn from that. Okay, it's a form of deductive reasoning. And so let's take a look at that one first. Let's say we make the claim and a major premise, and in that major premise, we assume that that everyone who is caught speeding on I-94 will receive a $75 fine. We state it in the form of an absolute. Okay? So that's our major premise right now. Everyone caught speeding on I-94 will receive a $75 fine. That's the major premise. Then we come up with a minor premise that says Chad was caught speeding on I-94. So what can we deduct from that? What can we deduct about Chad and what happened to Chad? We can deduct that Chad then received a $75 fine. Now the only problem with the syllogism is if the major premise at any point is proven to be untrue, or the minor premise is seen as not being always under the authority of the major premise, then the argument can be easily undermined and the deduction can be proven to be invalid. Okay, so syllogisms are good when you deal in terms of absolute. So if you're dealing with science or you're dealing with, mostly sciences, I wouldn't even say legal issues because sometimes there are exceptions to the rule. The syllogism can be a difficult one to use or a risky one. And that's why I also put in here the enthymeme. Some of you may choose to use an enthymeme, which is stated instead of being stated as an absolute, is stated as probability. Okay, so and either a major premise or a minor premise is presented, but not both. Okay, and the deduction made is an implication. So let's change this. Let's say we say, hey, most everyone caught speeding on I-94 receives a $75 fine, and Chad was caught speeding on I-94. So we can assume that it's highly probable that Chad received a $75 fine, realizing that if they find that Chad's uncle or his brother-in-law was the cop that stopped him, that police officer could have elected to just give him a warning or to let him off the hook. Now you may say, well, Tangi, why is it necessary to be this technical on the matter? Because some of you will write to things like school uniforms or the death penalty or whatnot, and it's very tempting to speak in terms, to speak in absolute terms when you deal with that. But there are exceptions to the rule that occur from time to time. And if you speak in the form of absolutes, when the one exception is brought to bear to what it is you're claiming, your whole argument then is vulnerable and will fall apart. What's recommended in most instances is the enthymeme, unless you're dealing with issues of science or you can prove that what you're saying is indeed absolute. Anytime you construct a logical argument, there are different factors that you have to pay attention to. And I've placed these things on this slide along with including in your packet at the end of this PowerPoint a logo sheet and with all of these properties on it. And you can use that as you start to develop your argument. Okay, the first thing that is a part of a logical argument, if you're using a logical argument or logos to represent your stated position, is a thesis? A thesis is an accumulation of all the claims that you're making. So let's say you come up with a thesis that hot dogs consumption for children under the age of 12 is dangerous or should no longer be allowed. That is your thesis, okay? Maybe you believe that abortion is wrong. That is your thesis, okay? Or you believe that all protests should be of a non-violent nature, okay? All of those themes, those thesis statements represent an accumulation of claims, okay? Sometimes claims need a qualifier because if it stands alone, it doesn't truly represent the comprehensive nature of the speaker's thoughts or beliefs. So let's go back to abortion. Let's say a person said, I believe that abortion is wrong. And they have an exception to that. They believe that it's wrong except in cases of incest, rape, or the endangerment of the mother's health. Well, then they better say those exceptions because the audience will not have as complete of an understanding of their stance if they neglect to put that in there. So, do you have an exception to your belief? Well, you better state that. Then you're going to list the claims. The claims express why you believe what you believe. So, why do you believe that only nonviolent protests are best? Why do you believe that abortion is wrong except in cases of incest, rape, or the endangerment of the health of the mother? Why do you believe that hot dog consumption should not be allowed for children under the age of 12? As you answer the question of why, you're starting to come up with claims. Okay? And we'll talk about different types of claims in a minute. Once you have your claims established, then you need to go and get some evidence. And then you need to, when necessary, show the link between the evidence and the claim. Show the validity of the link between the evidence and the claim. Right? All right. So claims, when you state a claim, I've told you, I've given you examples of claims of the thesis statement. Then now we need to talk about claims. Why do I believe that hot dogs should not be consumed by children who are 12 years old or younger? Well, because it increases obesity in children. Or why do I believe that abortion is wrong? Because it violates the rights of the unborn. Why do I believe that nonviolent protests are best? Because violence begets violence. Okay? Those are clear states of affairs, clear conclusions that I have made that I now have to get the evidence to prove out. Okay? All right. So what evidence am I going for? Let me back it up a little bit. Let's go back to each claim and let's talk about it because the claims that I proposed to you that I just told you about, those are examples. There are three types of claims that you can bring. The first claim is a claim of fact. So you can claim that that you believe that hot dog consumption increases obesity in children. Well, when you state that, you have to prove that that's true. Either it is true or it's not. Okay, that's a claim of fact. Either hot dog consumption does increase obesity in children or it doesn't. So you can state your beliefs as a claim of fact. You can also state a claim of value. This is where you say this is right or wrong, this is good or bad. Okay, this is important or unimportant. And that's where the example that I gave you about abortion would fit. I believe that abortion is wrong except in cases of incest, rape, or endangerment of the mother's health because I believe that it violates the rights of the unborn and that's wrong. You hear where I'm going with that? So I make the claim that based on what I believe is right or wrong concerning my values. Okay? And then the last one is a claim of policy. where I recommend that one course of action is superior above all others. That's where we go with the nonviolent protests. I believe that nonviolent protests are the best protests and should be engaged in above all others. Now, when I put in a claim of policy, I must provide that there's a need or a problem, that there's a solution, and there's evidence of the solution's feasibility. So I might say, violence begets violence, and we are becoming more violent in our culture. And a lot of the violence that's occurring is occurring when it comes to protest, and that's a problem. I also think that nonviolent protests will address this problem most effectively, because when I engage in a peaceful protest, the threat of violence is minimized because people don't feel threatened, and therefore they don't respond in a fight or flight manner. And then I start to point out evidence of its feasibility. The other folks that had nonviolent protests, or throughout history, nonviolent protests have proven to get more accomplished than violent protests. If one side commits to remaining nonviolent, oftentimes, even if the other side starts out being violent, they abandon it and return to the nonviolent side of things, and things get accomplished. Okay? So a claim of policy. So look at the argument you're preparing. Are you saying that something is true or not true? Then you have a claim of fact, and you have to get evidence that proves that it's true or not true. Do you have a claim of value where you say something is right or wrong? If you're doing right or wrong, then you need to prove out why it's morally right or why it's morally wrong. And if you're using a claim of policy, then you have to show the factors of policy that I just mentioned, okay? We've talked a lot about evidence, particularly in Chapter 8, so go and gather your evidence. It's on the slide there. But the facts, the statistics, the testimonials, the narratives, gather that evidence, okay? But then you need to connect. You need to show the valid connection between the evidence that you gained and your claim. So I claim this, I have this to prove it out, and that's why the link between the two is valid. Okay? There are three ways to do this with a warrant. One is to use a motivational warrant. So let's say I talk about obesity with children, and I am dealing with a group of parents at a camp that's designed for kids who have struggles with managing their weight. Well, as I talk to these parents and I try to persuade them to no longer have their children consume hot dogs, then what am I doing? I'm talking about the need for the children to have a reduction in weight for their health and their quality of life. Okay, so I go and I say hot dogs should not be allowed as a food choice for children 12 years old or younger, and I say that I bring out that's my statement, my thesis, my claim is that it creates obesity in the children, and then that's a claim of fact, and then I go get evidence to show them that these children that consumed hot dogs had a higher level of obesity than the children that did not. And then I go on to show that the children that lost weight had a higher quality of life and had fewer health issues. What am I doing? I'm dealing with the needs and the emotions of those who are in the audience. These parents care about these kids. That's why they have them at this camp, and they're trying to address this issue. So they are in that second group of persuasion. They're with me as far as they agree with me, but now I'm trying to get them to act in a certain fashion and not feed their children a high caloric food. You see, so that is a motivational warrant. An authoritative warrant is also in there. Let's say we go back to the nonviolent protest, and I go forth to say, I believe that we should not have violent protests because more is accomplished with nonviolence than with violence. And then I pull on the thought of a famous person, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who prescribed to nonviolent protests in a loyal and such a, oh my goodness, I'm sorry, I'm stumbling over my words, but he adhered to it so emphatically that he endured some major atrocities. But in the end, what he campaigned for, a lot of it did get accomplished. So I could use him as a valid, to show the validity of the link between my claim that nonviolent protests are best and my evidence that nonviolent protests gets more done. Okay, hope you understood that pretty well. Sorry about the stumbling. All right, and then the last one is quite extensive. These are substantive ones, and this is where you use logic, and there are three forms of them. The first one is causation, where you look for cause and effect. If you can find a cause and effect relationship between your claim and the evidence that you're putting forth, you need to play on that. So if you can show, look, the more children eat hot dogs, the more intestinal problems they have, then and you can show that Dr. So-and-so said this, and you can use a table to show facts and stats. You've just warranted together by showing the cause and effect through statistics, okay? I've shown you that, these children eat this, and more of them have intestinal problems. I can use a sign to infer a connectedness between two variables, where I say, when this happens, this happens. If this is removed, then that is removed. So I say, if the people that are protesting are violent, then more violence occurs. If people who are protesting are non-violent, and they remove violence, then the people who are against the protest are reluctant to behave violently as well. I can show a sign, okay? So where there's smoke, there's fire. Where there's cough, there's cold. That's a way to do that. Or then I can compare I can use an analogy where I compare two similar cases to show that there is a link. So I might say, okay, in this instance where there was in this instance where there was a lot of violence in the school and school uniforms were instituted, that the violence went down, and this school is similar to the school that I'm talking about. So I believe that if we institute uniforms in this school, that bullying will also go down. What have I done? I've used a story and I've compared what happened with another school to what's likely to happen in our school, because and I'm using that to show that the link is valid. The link between the evidence and the claim is valid. They have wonderful examples of this in your book, and you can find them if you can take the time to read this. This picture was actually pulled from your book, and I do recommend that you take the time to read that. All right, let's talk about the passionate appeal. The passionate appeal is quite interesting as well. And this is instituted, a lot of times people are in periods of great jubilation or periods of great sorrow, and they need something to help them cope with what state they're in, to move them to another state, and then thus you have persuasion. When they're like that, facts and statistics won't get the job done. You need a passionate appeal. You need an appeal that adheres to the emotions. Sometimes when I talk about pathos, people assume that I'm talking about the speaker becoming all emotional. Not true. Well, I'm talking about the speaker appealing to the emotions. So pathos is an argument that uses vivid descriptions and emotionally charged words to move an audience, to move them from one state to another. Aristotle talked about 4 sets of emotions in this. He said, you need, in pathos, usually speakers are trying to move people from a state of anger to meekness, love to hatred, fear to boldness, and shame to shamelessness, and sometimes in the opposite direction. Now, I encountered an effective pathos appeal that I want to share with you now. When we first found out that our 2 younger children, that my oldest son was autistic, we were in a state of shame. We thought it was something that we'd done. Maybe I stood too close to the microwave. Maybe I didn't take my vitamins as religiously as I should have. I didn't know what the problem was, but I was in a state of shame. Whenever we go out, if Nehemiah was having a hard time, I'd try to, cover him up, and I'd apologize and whatnot. And I had heard all the awful statistics. I'd heard all the facts and stats that it's incurable, that he'll be this way the rest of his life, and I couldn't stand any more facts and statistics. I needed someone to help me, to cope with this. And there was a lady that came to a conference, and she did so by using a passionate appeal. And what she did is she started helping us to see through vivid descriptions and emotionally charged words how it was better to manage your children with a state of shamelessness than shame. To quit apologizing to the world because you happen to have a special needs child, and that child may do some things from time to time that might be a bit out of the norm or the normal social order. And by the time she was done with us, I was practically standing on the table going, hey, and now we go everywhere. We do everything. And if Nehemiah's having a bad day or his younger sister's having a bad day, we just, we go on our way. We make sure we are always appropriate towards how we deal with others that are in our environment, because we don't want to infringe upon them, in a careless manner. But I'm done apologizing about the fact that my child has an issue. And it was a pathos appeal that led me to that, okay? You need to identify the shared relevant values. You need to make sure that you communicate those with sincerity and conviction. If you're going to do a pathos appeal, you have to be able to manage your emotions. Using your personal experience will work. And this lady that talked to us had a son who was autistic, but she did 3 things well, and you will have to do these things well. She kept control of her emotions, and she told us what actually happened. Her claims were legitimate. We actually saw pictures of her son and videotapes of her son, and she didn't brag to us. Coming across as a bragger is not good. With an emotional appeal, with the pathos appeal, you have to manage timing and conditions well too. Make sure it's a topic that the people genuinely care about, and that they're willing to take personal responsibility for, and that they feel their actions will help impact. If they don't feel like it's their duty to act, and they have no personal responsibility, they simply will not take action, because they haven't taken ownership of it. And if they don't feel, you may have accomplished the first 3, but if you don't show them that their actions can actually help, they won't take it either. So if you're going to take on a passionate appeal, remember to do these things using emotionally charged words and vivid descriptions. Narratives and examples and testimonials are excellent forms of evidence with this type of persuasion. You're more likely to win them over. There's some other thoughts in here that I want you to make sure you manage well, but I don't need to spend time on those. Okay, pathos and reasoning. Sometimes people don't see that there's a connection here. You can woo people over through emotionally charged words and vivid descriptions, using your words and whatnot, and using the elements of timing and conditions. But you also have to make sure that as you do that, they can follow your logic. Don't get so out of control emotionally that they just feel like you just revved them up. Don't just push their buttons and get them all revved up. Make sure you have sound reasoning and logic if you want your persuasion to last, okay, when the emotions are gone. Ethos must be managed in all forms of persuasion. People must believe that you have goodwill, good sense, and good moral character, or they simply will not believe you. Now, we talked about these a lot in chapter 5. Make sure that they know that you know what you're talking about. That's competence, that's good sense, that you have their best interest at heart, and that you're honest and straightforward in your persuasion. Or it doesn't matter how skillful your persuasion is, it won't get the job done. So which do you use? It depends on what you want to accomplish. Rational argumentation, or logos, does a better job of affecting thought. Emotional appeals, or pathos, usually affect action. So decide what you're trying to do and choose the method that will get you there. Lastly, I mentioned the contemporary appeals. I said we'd go through these rather quickly, and we will. There is a contemporary appeal known as a needs-based appeal. If you can take your argument and your claim and connect them to the needs of the people and communicate that effectively, you will win your argument. So look at what you're claiming and see if there's a need that's connected with it. In the motivational appeal, you must look at how the audience reasons and deal with 3 elements of their reasoning. Their attitude towards the proposed change, the feelings they have about the consequences that's connected with that change, and how significant others in their life will feel about change. No change occurs in a vacuum. If you're trying to get people to change, they're going to have to go back into an environment that's used to them being another way. you're going to need to equip them to manage those factors if you want your change to stick. The last one has to do with how the audience will mentally process the message, and you need to match your message up with how they're processing. If they are going to process it at a central level where they look deeply at the argument and how it's structured, then you better attend to that and make sure your argument is well structured and the claims and all of that are thorough. If they're processing at a peripheral level, then they're not concerned about necessarily the depth of the argument, but they're looking at your style, your reputation, your appearance, and slogans. And so you better make sure that you're well polished. If you do that and you prepare and you match your preparation with the processing level of the audience, your argument stands a better chance of getting through. Lastly, don't forget to manage your listening when you engage in persuasion, and listen critically. Make sure that you manage your content. You need to know your subject matter. You need to come up with quality sources and use them in your speech. I want to hear sources cited in the speech. You also need to be sincere and communicate effectively. Now, how do you communicate effectively? By managing your delivery. This is not the time to revert back to poor posture. Keep triple threat posture. Gesture as you need to add to your message. Maintain your eye contact, your facial expressions, and keep good vocal variety in there, and your message will be much more effective. And lastly, make sure you enjoy the ride. This is not, you're never going to persuade all of the people every time you step out, okay? But if you thoroughly investigated your argument, and you're confident and respectful in how you presented it, then the people who hear your persuasion will be the beneficiaries and not the victims, and I'll be pleased with you. So good luck as you prepare for debate or for your individual persuasive appeals, and I look forward to hearing them. If you have further questions, please feel free to ask me. Thank you. Oh, clicker's not stopping, so.